For many of us, this is probably one of your most anticipated vehicles in 1.55, if not the car that you're most eager to get your hands on. And before I forget, of course, we need to say before we get into the review that this was a livery replica of the most powerful Grand Prix car ever, the Benetton B186, around a 1400 horsepower car in qualifying, which I asked for somebody to do a livery replica of. It's not period correct, but who really cares? And AJC Liveries, who I will link to their livery down in the description, very kindly did this replica, which looks fantastic. Now, the biggest caution I would give to anyone racing in Grand Prix vehicles in pretty much any game, at least a game that takes itself seriously as far as realism, is that there's possibly no other kind of vehicle which is so temperamental, let's say, based on the tyres which it's fitted with, because the weight is so low and they are so reliant on that high flow downforce that any change in tyre and you're really going to feel it. And as you can see in this particular event, I'm using racing hards, which if I recall correctly is not what it comes with. It has racing mediums as standard. Of course the hards drop the point level, but they also drop the performance a little bit as well. More understeer, less grip, more prone to spinning up its wheels a bit more, which of course it can do anyway, but you definitely feel the difference on hard tyres. As I said, you do with any Grand Prix, and with an older one with more primitive, by today's standards at least, aero and downforce, you can certainly feel the difference. Likewise with racing softs. Now if you do fit the softs and go for the race transmission, etc., you can get it just up under 1000 points, which I would say for a naturally aspirated car with 773 horsepower, that's hitting pretty high for a vehicle with that kind of power level. And of course part of the reason why is the weight is even lower. Formula 1 cars aren't exactly heavy to begin with. This one though is even less at 505, but I think this might be the lightest Grand Prix car which we've ever had in a Gran Turismo game. That could be wrong, but I want to say that that might be accurate. I don't recall any of them being under 500 kilos. Realism be damned. In terms of straight line performance, well, I definitely wouldn't say it's lacking. Of course going up against AI isn't the best gauge, but even so, being able to do 200 miles an hour or close enough on standard gear ratios, well, that shows how much potential it's got, especially when you've got a hefty amount of downforce as well. In terms of handling, well, this is part of the reason why I was really looking forward to it. I love the old school eras of F1, particularly the 80s and 90s is where most of my favourite ones come from, and as a non-Grand Prix fan, generally speaking, it takes a bit more for a car to really grab me and for me to use it more regularly. Most of the other Formula 1 cars, I don't really use that often, to be honest. Even back in the Formula Gran Turismo days, it wasn't necessarily one of my go-tos. And part of the reason for that these days is, of course, the point level is so high on these cars that it isn't always that useful. However, when you do get the chance to use them, I will definitely say I prefer this over the TA. Of course, the TA in a straight line should have the advantage, but again, with that turbo lag, it takes a minute for it to get there. It really is the mid-range and top end where a car like that has its advantage, whereas most of the time, this feels more than adequate. And maybe that's just me, but it really doesn't feel like it's lacking in terms of acceleration or straight line performance. I think the biggest bonus on a car like this is how much cheaper it is than many of us probably thought. Of course, if it were a real Grand Prix replica, it would be a heck of a lot more, but at 1 million credits, well, you really can't complain about that. If you consider it this way, you can pay that quite literally for any of the Vision GT cars. So that is way, way better value for money in terms of being able to actually A, change settings on this car, and B, get really good lap times out of it, which you can't really say about most of the Vision GTs because you're constantly fighting against them so much. The long and the short of it is, it's everything I expected it to be, and kind of everything I hoped it would be as well. It sounds great, it looks great, of course it's a fantastic livery base. The visual upgrades which you can do to it, which I showcased of course in my 1.55 review on Thursday when it dropped, they're fantastic. I love that level of customization, creating different teams, different slight variations on the era, even wildly different approaches depending on the colour scheme, tuning, and that combination of aero which you go for. It's kind of like having multiple cars in one, in effect. And if that's coming from me, someone who isn't the biggest of F1 fans, well, that kind of says a lot about how good the car is. I don't think, after driving it a bit more and thinking about it for a while, I would not say that this car necessarily overtakes the Ferrari F10 as my favourite Grand Prix car of the entire series. That car is just perfectly balanced for me, and I know even in that game, GT5, a lot of people prefer the F2007 because it is technically quicker, but to me, I like the F10 because it feels like that more angular, kind of squarer era of F1, total focus on handling, not so much on straight line performance, and that really suits me. And again, that's part of the reason why I was looking forward to this one. Less power, less weight, no lag, and almost completely focused on the cornering. As it happens, it's more than adequate enough in a straight line to certainly rival Formula cars with way more power. That's it for my thoughts though. I'd love to hear yours down below. Maybe if you were disappointed perhaps about the car for some reason, I would be very curious to hear that. And once again, special thanks to AJC Liveries. Link to this one below if you're a fellow B186 enthusiast, and stick around tomorrow for the next review, which will of course be the Hyundai. But for now, thanks for watching.